Hello, friends. I'm Bishop David Copeland, General Overseer of AEGA Ministries, and we are here today on our Meet the Leaders podcast with Dr. Jan Harbuck. She is the Vice President and General Secretary of AEGA Ministries, and this lady, I'm telling you what, she has forgotten more about church and ministry tax law than I will ever know in my life. But Dr. Jan, it's good to have you with us today, and welcome to the podcast. The AEGA Meet the Leaders podcast is an avenue that we wanted to bring to you to just show the inner workings of AEGA and to share with you today specifically with Dr. Jan some of the historical record, how AEGA began, what was involved in all that. Why in the world would Dr. Harbuck want to do something like this? But we're going to talk about that. But we wanted to do this to let you know that we're real people just like the rest of you. But the predominant focus of AEGA is that we are a spirit-filled family of ministries. Every one of us that you'll see on this broadcast has our own personal ministry. We have other things that we do, but we come together under the banner of AEGA to do something together for the kingdom of God. And if you are interested, if you're looking for a family of like-minded friends and a fellowship of people that you know don't want you doing ministry alone, then you can visit our website at aega.org. You can also send an email to Dr. Elizabeth Foy, our credential director, at info@aega.org. Or you can call us on our 800 number, 800-842-5176. So that's the end of my commercials. And Dr. Jan, it's so good to have you with us today.
It's good to be here.
And tell us, how in the world did AEGA go from just a small community fellowship in Monroe, Louisiana, to now we have, without exaggeration, probably close to 4 million members affiliated with AEGA worldwide? How did that happen?
Well, it was God, I can tell you. It's kind of a long story. I'll try to shorten it, but I guess I was there when it happened, and I guess I already know you remember that old song. But
it happened before you knew it.
Yeah, it happened before we knew it. You know, in any ministry, you grow into it. That's one thing Henry would always say. You don't go in ministry, you grow in ministry. Yeah, because good. If God showed you down the road what you were going to have to go through, things that happened, you'd run the other way a lot of times. Mm-hmm. But Henry and I were in ministry together, and he had a counseling center, a Christian counseling center. I was teaching music and choir director at our church and things like that. I grew up in church all my life, and Henry did too. But he had a heart for ministers. And I always had a heart for ministers too. I didn't understand when evangelists or when we'd have revivals at churches, you know, people were going on about going out and witnessing and getting people saved. And that was good, but my burning in my heart was to pray for the minister, to pray for the evangelist, to pray for the pastor. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I thought something was wrong with me, you know. But later I realized God has a calling. You know, I still want to win souls, but right. My heart goes to minister to ministers. Right. And Henry had the same heart. God put that in both of us. And so he was counseling, at his Christian Counseling Center, and he went ahead, him and Dr. Starks founded the International School of Ministry, which was a local Bible college here. And that's before people ever heard of pretty much correspondence school. Mm-hmm. And we had internal classes here. But then we began to get people from other areas that wanted to take the classes, but they couldn't come into Monroe, mm-hmm. Every week, to the classes. So Henry started doing it by correspondence just to help them. He didn't realize he was starting something. He's right. Really one of the founders of correspondence and long-distance education. Right. Because back then, this was in the early 70s, mid-70s, you didn't hear distant learning or correspondence, So he started that, and then people began to graduate from our school. And they were wanting to get ordained, and we couldn't ordain out of a school, out of a Bible college. And but this was back like in the mid-70s, and that's when the charismatic renewal hit, and a lot of churches that were in denominations were going independent, or there was Baptist churches or Baptists or different denominations were getting spirit-filled, and they didn't exactly fit. They didn't feel, they were an anti-denomination, but they just didn't feel like they fit anymore where they were.
Right.
So they started independent works and churches and ministries, and Henry came from a Baptist background himself. He calls himself a Baptist-Costal. The Holy Ghost got a hold of him later. But so he likes to reach out to all evangelicals, and so they began to ask him about ordination, and he said, I can't ordain you out of the school. So, but then he remembered a vision that God gave him actually before we met.
Wow.
He was in a motel one time. He was working down in South Louisiana, and God began to deal with him. And those that know Henry know he can be very emotional, but when it comes to the things of God, if he's going to be slain in the spirit, it has to be God putting him there.
Right.
Nobody's going to push him.
Right.
And so, but he found himself on the floor, face down, in a motel room, and he was crying out to God, where do I go from you? What do you want me to do? And immediately God began to open the heavens and show him a vision of the international ministry around the world. Well, it just kind of blew his mind, and when he come here and he finished college, finished school, got his degree, and he was a psychotherapist and started at the Christian Counseling Center. We had met at that time. And he had shared with me about that, and I thought, oh, that sounds good. I didn't have any idea really. I just knew I was called to ministry, when at a very young age. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew it'd be something probably with ministry, music. But anyway, so God, after these people began to want ordained, he remembered, God brought that back to his memory. He said, I called you more than just to be a counselor, more than just to be, to start a Bible school to teach ministers. He said, there's more to it. And so God began to show him about starting an international fellowship that would reach out to independent spirit-filled churches and ministers that didn't feel like maybe they fit in a certain denomination, but they wanted to have a covering and not be alone in ministry, but yet have the liberty and independence to do what God had called them to do. So he began to share that with me, and I thought, do you realize what you're saying? I said, this has to be God, because, we could never dream this up ourselves. We wouldn't have to start a fellowship. Right. But God began to deal with my heart, because he had to, when God calls one, I mean, you and Pam know, together in ministry, that when God calls one, he has to call the other. Right. And so as he began to share this vision with me and everything, I knew that he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, God had called him to start this fellowship. But I had to have something from God myself, Right. So I was praying one day, and God, he just revealed it to me in such a mighty way. I get chills now even thinking about it. But at that point, after that, I had no doubt, what we had to do and what God was leading us to do. And so, matter of fact, one of his clients in his clinic was a minister that actually had started this local fellowship here of churches, and mostly ministers. It was like a ministerial little fellowship here in Monroe. So Henry he had come to Henry because he'd hurt his back, and he was, just wanting prayer and counseling and stuff, and where he was going in ministry. And so Henry began to share with him what God was showing him about fellowship. And he said, well, Dr. Harbuck said, several years ago, this was kind of in the early 80s by now, he said, several years ago, he said, God's, we set up, it took us a long time to set this up here in Monroe. We had a couple of attorneys and some ministers, and we set this up for a ministry, but it's just local. And then I got hurt, and we haven't really been able to get it off the ground. We've had a few meetings. And he said, I can't, if you want this corporation, I'll just donate it over to you. If you can use it, fine. I'd like to see what you can do with it, because I know God showed us how to do this, and it took us a long time to get it.
Yeah.
So Henry didn't think a lot about it at first, and he said, well, sure, I'll look at it, So he showed it to me, and we began to read it, and Henry said, man, this is everything God showed me in that vision years ago, And so we took that, and we had contacted the Internal Revenue to make sure it was still in compliance, and it was. And but we had to get an attorney then, and it took us a couple of years after that to really get it set up where it would be like a convention of churches, because AEGA structurally is set up just like the Assembly of God, Church of God, structurally with the IRS. We have the same status that they do, but we consider ourselves a fellowship, an independent fellowship, rather than a denomination. But with the IRS, they look at us the same as they would a denomination like that. And so Henry dealt back and forth with the IRS for a while, and they even told him, said, you should have been a lawyer. You've written so much stuff, we can't even read it all. But, and you have to have 5 subordinates to get started for a group exemption, because this corporation did not have a group exemption. It just had the nonprofit status. And so to get a group exemption, that was a whole nother step that took us a while, because we had to have 5 subordinates to do that. And so we got those together, and it was a process. It wasn't an easy process, but usually when God calls you to do something, it's not easy, So we got that started and got it all set up, and then Charisma Magazine at that time was just coming on, just starting, really. And so we started to run a little ad in Charisma Magazine. And all of a sudden, people started calling us from here and there, sending in, applications. Back then, we didn't have emails, and we didn't have computers too much, to do what we do now. But they would just mail us, they wanted information or call us. We'd send them a packet. And we just began to grow. And people would say, I looked at Charisma Magazine, and all those ads on that paper, that one ad just stood out to me. Everything else was blurry, but it just jumped out at me. And it was just amazing. Then it was just word of mouth started going. And then we still had our clinic, and because we were having to fund this, to get it off the ground.
Right.
And so one day I was in the clinic. We had some patients in there, and I was answering the phone there, and Henry had a client. And so the phone rang, and this operator come on and said, you have a call from India. Will you take this call? And I said, Indiana? And she said, no, ma'am, India. And I went, oh, okay. So Brother Prasad, I'll never forget, he was the first brother from India I ever talked to. And so he come on, and we began to talk, and I got so excited. And all the patients were sitting there looking at me like I was crazy. I should have been the one counseling.
Yeah.
So I ran, because Henry said, don't ever bother me when I'm with a patient, So he had a couple in there he was counseling with. So I went and knocked on the door, and I told Henry, I said, you have a call from India from a pastor. And Henry said, oh, excuse me, I'll be right back. And he just took on, and they just sat there like, what happened?
Wow.
And so that was our first experience of overseas, in another country.
Yeah.
And God just began to open doors in India, Africa, South America, Philippines, Europe. The doors just began to open worldwide, They started coming together. So that's kind of how it got started.
Wow.
And then we sold our clinic, and because AEGA began to double every year. And we were running to keep up with it.
Yeah.
So we had to hire people. We had to sell our clinic. I quit teaching music. We had to go into it full time for it to work.
Yeah.
And we ate beans and rice for a while, but we survived.
Yeah, you always do. I jokingly tell people when they go into ministry and they surrender to the call of God, I always like to say there's some fine print on the contract you sign with Jesus that says whatever needs to be done. That's what you have to do. Whatever it takes. That's what you do. You talked about, mentioned about subordinates. What does that mean in nonprofit language or in a convention of churches?
Well, a subordinate is like, we have the group exemption that we can issue the 501c3 to churches and ministries. And that's so when a church or ministry comes under our umbrella, under the parent organization, they're called a subordinate, and that's what the IRS goes by. You know, every year we have to submit to the IRS a list of our subordinates to keep them in compliance with their 501c3. And during that time we were setting all this up, I went through training myself with the Internal Revenue. They began to train me on how to do church tax and law, and what churches need to do to have a good foundation and to be in compliance, what ministries have to do to maintain their 501c3, about how to file their 990s and all this thing, and you know what it takes for church to be a church. You know, it's kind of like in a gray area with the IRS, but there's certain things you have to do to, if you know something comes, because churches do get audited, or they, you know, all it takes is one person in the church to call the IRS and say, you know, they didn't use my money right, or they didn't do this, and it's hard for a church to get audited. They usually let the church know and give them a chance to say what happened before they bring in an audit, you know. But ministries is different. Now, if you're an evangelistic ministry, you know, it's very easy to be audited. You know, it's easier than a church, because at least with a church, they feel like a church has more of a covering and a board, you know, to oversee, you know, what's going on. But with ministries, and I deal a lot with all different kinds of ministries, not just evangelistic ministries. We had Christian counseling centers. We do Bible schools. Matter of fact, Trans World Accrediting Commission, that was one of our first 5 subordinates. Henry founded that, and because he saw there was a great need for an accrediting commission, because when he had the Bible school starting, he couldn't find an accrediting commission that was really, he thought, had the standards that it needed to be for a Christian school. And like I said, there wasn't a lot of independent Bible colleges at that time. So he founded, you know, Trans World Accrediting Commission, and with some other people, scholars and things, to help him. And so that was one of the subordinates we submitted to the Internal Revenue as one of our 5 subordinates, and they'd never heard of a Christian accrediting commission. So they had to have a meeting with their board, and Henry kept telling them, you have to give it tax exemption. They said, but Dr. Harbuck, we never heard of something like this. He said, but it is a nonprofit. It's covering Christian schools, so you have to do it. You don't have a choice. So they did.
That's awesome. One of the big, people would call it a red flag when you talk about joining a fellowship or being a part of an outside organization as a church or as a ministry, that parent, and I know I'm using the wrong terminology here, that parent organization actually comes in to try to control and to dictate how you run your ministry. Share with us what the difference is in that kind of structure and what AEGA really is. How do we operate in a situation
AEGA
like
has general oversight. For us to issue the 501c3, we have to, you know, have documentation that you're set up properly. We even do that for you. We do the state incorporation, your bylaws. We issue the 501c3, then we inform the IRS that you're under our group. But the IRS requires us to have just general oversight. That don't mean we own your property. We're not on your board. You know, we give you liberty to do, as long as you're teaching the gospel, the truth.
You have full autonomy.
You have full autonomy. You know, you have your own board. You can pull out at any time you want to. The only thing about leaving a group exemption is that once you pull out, you lose your 501c3. So either you have to file directly with the IRS and get it on your own, or go under another group. You know, and so, but as far as being autonomous, you know, any subordinate that's under us, we just have general oversight, and it's really for their benefit, because there's not many CPAs or attorneys that are versed in church law. So,
true word. That's the truth.
Because even we have an accounting firm here that deals with nonprofits, but we're the first fellowship that they ever carried. And they've been with us over 30, close to 40 years. They've been doing, because we wanted an outside firm. And we were recommended to them because they do nonprofits. But still, they had to learn, and I even had to teach them what we do.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so because it's a little different how we operate. But they've done a good job. But like I said, we just have general oversight, and because we want the ministry, we don't want them to be out there alone. Because if you have your own ministry, yes, you can go get your own 501c3.
Right.
You know, you can file and get it on your own, but what's going to happen when you have a question?
Right.
Or something comes up, or you get a letter from the IRS stating you haven't done this or done that, or, a situation comes up in the church. You know, there's so many things going on now with all different kind of stuff the church is having to deal with. And what really, God has really given us favor, not only with the IRS, I have called them, I have a hotline, I've had to call them several times, but also we partner with other groups, like the Church Tax and Law Group, attorneys, that if I don't know the answer, I can either call the IRS directly for you, or I can get a hold of one of our attorneys through, our partnership with them, that is versed in church law and do represent churches and ministries, in different cases. So to me, that's a great benefit, because we're kind of, I would say, like a buffer between you and the IRS, because the IRS said, we're going to come to you first, before we go to your subordinates.
Right, right.
So if one of our subordinates has an issue, they call me, and then I can talk to the IRS on their behalf and help them, or get assistance from our accountant or from our attorneys to help them, So otherwise, if you're out there on your own, you're going to have to find a CPA or attorney that you're going to have to pay $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 an hour, almost, to talk to you, to help you through this. When you come under us, we ask to, because we all partner together with our subordinates, and what people give here, that covers that kind of thing. It's, you have free consultation,
right,
24/7. We're here to help you.
What is the difference? AEGA, which is the title, the acronym means the Association of Evangelical Gospel Assemblies. That's our full name. What is, if there is a difference, explain the difference between a denomination and a convention of churches and ministries. What?
Well, I think a denomination, the main difference is they just have a little more control, over who ministers in your church sometimes, or who pastors that church. Some denominations, they send the pastor to the church. Right. They don't give the church a chance to vote on a pastor.
Right.
Or either if you're going to start a church, you have to start it under, you have to sign the deed over to them.
And they own your property, which we do not do.
No,
I want that clear. We do not own people's property.
So there's churches that's even had to, something's come up and they didn't realize that their church the deed was signed over to a denomination, And so, but I think with AEGA, that's the difference in a fellowship versus a denomination. And I want to make this clear: we're not anti-denomination.
Right. Absolutely.
Matter of fact, we try to, we work with different. We even have denominations send people to us for different reasons, you know. And so when we even have some of our ministers that pastor a denominational church, right. And so we have our place and they have their place. But I would just say in AEGA, what Henry and I and our board, through the years, we've always wanted to see the minister have freedom to fulfill the vision God has given them and start a church or a ministry, without being lorded over, or told every move to make. Right. I mean, as long as you're preaching and teaching the truth, and, we're here to pray with you and give you resources, whatever we can do to help you, with your ministry.
Right. How, if someone is interested in starting a ministry and needs AEGA's help, what would be the process of going about that?
Well, if they're going to start a ministry or a church, the main thing that benefit that we have to help them is to get their foundational documents done right. I've talked to so many ministers and ministries through the years that just, sometimes it's a good idea, but it's not a God idea. It's okay to start a church, but you can't just all of a sudden start a church or a ministry and start receiving contributions
Right.
and, without having your foundation
Right.
down.
Right.
And one thing the IRS, when they were training me, they said, all we're asking is if we're going to let churches and ministries take in money that is tax-free to them, all we want them to do is just use it right.
Yeah.
They said, is that too much to ask?
No, it's not.
And I said, no, sir, it's not.
Yeah.
Because there is so much in the church nowadays
Exactly.
of things coming up, and it's just, and when that happens, it opens the door for the government to get their foot into the church.
Right.
And so but what we try to do is teach them, and we do the documents for them. I can do state incorporations in every state.
Mm-hmm.
I make sure their sales tax exemption is done in every state, because every state's different.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Of how you do different things. But we do a really good set of bylaws for a church or a ministry. Your board votes on those bylaws, and you can amend them at any time.
Right.
But you can always call us, and when something comes up and you need a change, or we can help you with that. And then to issue the 501c3 under our group exemption is so quick. We can do it in less than 30 days once all your documents are filled out.
Yeah.
And we fill out most of it for you,
Mm-hmm.
because we want to make sure it's done right.
Right.
And then, we're here, we have so many ministers and, like yourself and so many others that's been down that road that we can refer people to help them counsel with them on the do's and don'ts, to get started,
Right.
and how to start a church or how to start a ministry.
Right. So how would they contact you if
They
they're
just-
interested in your help?
They can just go to our website, just to aega.org, or they can just call us at our 800 number, info@aega.org. We're here. We're very easy to get a hold of.
Amen.
And then, the first thing, what we require is that the minister be licensed or ordained through the fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a requirement, because we can't cover a church unless we have oversight of the minister.
Right.
Because what people don't understand, they think, well, I just want to join y'all, or just join your group, but I'm already ordained somewhere else, but I want my church, I want y'all to help me. But when a ministry or a church comes under our group exemption, under our umbrella, we're liable for that church.
Right.
We're liable for anything.
Right.
So if you get sued, we get sued.
Right.
And people don't think about suits when they're starting stuff and doing things, but that people sometimes just look to sue somebody.
Exactly. And they will sue a minister and churches
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they would.
And our job too is to help you not get sued.
Yeah.
We give you resources. If you see our newsletter every month, because we're a member of the Tax Church and Law Association, we're a member of many groups like that where we pull resources from, and we keep up to date on all the recent laws that come out, all the court cases of churches, because we want to know things so we can help guide you so that you don't go down that path.
Right. Right.
So our newsletter is very informative. We do have articles from our ministers and things, but majority of, almost half of our newsletter is on, how to operate your church, how to operate your ministry. So, because we don't want people to ever come back and say, well, you didn't tell me that.
Right. Exactly.
So, we're constantly learning. Because times change so fast.
And the law's changing.
And the laws are changing.
Daily almost.
And so instead of you having to keep up with all of that, that's our job.
Yeah.
You let us do that for you. So we let you know what's coming down the pipe or what's happening. And that saves you a lot of time. That way you can go preach, do your ministry, do what God's called you to do, and not worry about all that.
Right. Dr. Jan Harbuck, who is the Vice President and General Secretary of AEGA Ministries. Thank you for being with us today. We're going to have you back on another one and talk about your music talk about some of your recordings. I know that makes you uncomfortable, but she is a phenomenal recording artist. And how many albums or CDs have you produced?
I've put out 14 now.
14 CDs. So we'll do another program just for that.
I do that in my spare time.
Yeah. And like someone asked me one time, when do you sleep? I said, I'm still looking for something to do between midnight and 3 a.m. And then I'll have the day pretty much set. But if you would like more information on how AEGA might be of benefit to you, be a part of a fellowship, or you're interested in something that we did not talk about this time, but we will the next time, training for the ministry. We have 2 schools that are affiliated with AEGA that we'll share about on another broadcast. But for more information on AEGA, visit our website, aega.org. You can also send an email to info@aega.org, or you can call toll-free 800-842-5176. And we would love to hear from you. And even if, even though we're very interested in you and want to help you to become a part of this fellowship, if you find out that this is not for you, we want to help you find somewhere where you can connect, because a 3-fold cord, a 3-stranded cord, is not easily broken. We want you to be a part and connected to something that's bigger than yourself, because now's the time. And God's raised us all up to be in the kingdom for such a time as this. I'm Bishop David Copeland, General Overseer of AEGA. You are watching the Meet the Leaders podcast. And until next time, I'm praying for the fire of the Holy Spirit of God to fall in your life today.